Can you tell us a little bit about BioShock's 1999 mode?
1999 mode is, I want to be clear, it's not like an entirely new game. You don't buy the game, get 2 games in one. It is a version of the game. Think of like when you play Monopoly with different house rules. It's sort of like that, where you can set a bunch of different rules, and where the rules are set, and the rules make a much more difficult, much more unforgiving game. And we call it 1999 mode because our first game came out in 1999, System Shock 2, and it was a tough game. And we wanted our fans from the old school, in the old days, to have this sense of a game that was pretty unforgiving. Because BioShock 1 was not particularly unforgiving. It was, we designed it so people could get through it. But we really wanted to give gamers that kind of challenge who wanted it. But it's tough stuff. It's like the hot sauce on the table, use it with care.
What opportunities do you see for BioShock games in the film industry?
Films are about stories, and video game stories. BioShock, I think, has a filmic story in some sense, but it's in terms of the amount of story there is, just in terms of the overall time the story takes and the kind of depth it goes into, is much more like a level of a book, of a novel or something. So you'd have to really adapt BioShock in the way you'd adapt a novel, is figuring out what the heart of it is and how to tell that story in a different medium, the same way you do adapting a novel. And there's lots of good examples of novel adaptations that are great, and there's novel adaptations that are not so great. And so you always want to at least start with a team that you feel everybody's on the same page about what you want to do, and then hopefully you keep your fingers crossed you get a good film out of it. But I used to be in the film industry. I know it's not an easy thing to do.
How have the recent Occupy movements played a role of Infinite?
They haven't, except because it's funny, both the Tea Party and the Occupy movements came about after we sort of came up with the movements, the movements that have some similarities in the game, the Founders and the Vox Populi. And the reason there is not because we sort of have some vision of the future. It's because BioShock Infinite is made by a bunch of history nerds who understand, at least from an amateur standpoint, sort of the political movements of the past. And generally, political movements tend to repeat themselves. The Occupy movement is not the first sort of leftist anti-capitalist movement ever in the country, and the Tea Party is not the first sort of. And these movements all have different aspects of them, so I don't want to sort of, there's different. Somebody in the Tea Party has different views than other people in the Tea Party, and some of the Occupy movement has different views than other people. But you see aspects of sort of nationalism and some aspects of xenophobia and some aspects of small government and things like that that you see. Or limiting the federal government. You see those movements, previously, whether it's the John Birch Society or the Know Nothings, or lots of movements have happened before. So we weren't really copying. We were copying more from the past than from the future or present.
Can you tell us a little bit about Songbird and what makes him such a formidable enemy?
Songbird is an interesting character because he is both this sort of unstoppable force that's pursuing you and Elizabeth, because his goal is to bring Elizabeth back to the tower from which you freed her from. But he's also, in his head, he's not fully human, and he doesn't really understand why she's left. And so there's this sort of pathos to him that he is this unstoppable force, but he's hurt and he's angry that she's left. He doesn't quite understand why, because she grew up in this tower, and he was her only companion, and he imprinted on her. And so he has both a job as her jailer and as her protector in a lot of ways.
What are some new weapons, and what's your favorite to use?
I think what's great about when you talk about weapons and what I like to use, I don't really think of weapons on their own. Everything in BioShock is, you think about sort of in combination with other things. I think it's one of the things that makes the franchise cool. So you have weapons in one hand, you have vigors in the other hand, which are sort of like X-Men style powers. You have gear that you wear. You can modify your weapons, you can modify your vigors. There's these skylines, as I talked about, that you can go around the city, and all these things. Then there's things in the world that you can, like, oil you can light on fire, and water you can electrify, and then there's these tears that they're sort of things from other realities that Elizabeth can bring into the battle space for you, whether new allies or more weapons or cover. So all these things are used in combination, and that's what really makes BioShock Infinite cool. And BioShock games in general cool is this sort of combinatorial thing, and it's going to make my combat experience in a space totally different than your combat experience. There's no prescribed method to approaching a combat.
What are you most proud of in Infinite?
I have to say for us, you never know how a gamer's going to feel about it, but for us, it's the ending. It's fairly atraditional. It's not a particularly standard ending. It's something I think people haven't really seen a lot of endings quite like this, and for us, it was a product of many, 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 many months of labor and conversation and argument and debate and then implementation. And I think we had we caught a few lucky breaks along the way, but it's something to me that I just I'm very, very. I came out exactly the way we hoped it would, and that doesn't always happen.